Hello and welcome to Inside Indie, the podcast all about the ins and outs of self-publishing. I'm your host, Holly Dunn, and today I'm talking with Rose, who is also known as RC Thompson on Instagram, and we're talking about accuracy reading, what it is, why you might need an accuracy reader, and what you need to know as an author. So let's get started.
I've never spoken with a sensitivity reader before, so I'm really interested to hear sort of the background about what you do and how it all works. So maybe you could start off by explaining what an accuracy reader or a sensitivity reader is. Is there any difference between those two things, or are they the same thing? And I'm sure it's going to be much better in your words than mine.
So they are the same thing, accuracy reader and sensitivity reader. There's been a bit of a trend towards using accuracy reader because of connotations with sensitivity, like, snowflake and things like that. And like, it really is more accuracy because you're looking at the accurate portrayal of various disabilities and things like that, more so than, I guess, censoring. I personally don't like censoring. I would rather writers write what they need to get out there in the world, because I think we need these tough topics out there. And I just want to make it more, I guess, accessible to people who have been through trauma to be able to read what authors want to put out there and their discourse on the topic.
That's really interesting, because I'd always heard it called sensitivity reading before, and accuracy reading to me has more the connotation of going through a manuscript and making sure that the characters wearing the same thing at the beginning of the chapter as they are at the end of the chapter, things like that. But what you're doing is accuracy on a different kind of level.
Yeah, I mean, I do look for that stuff anyway, just because I have a really good eye for detail, and I just notice that anyway. So if I see that, I'll mention it. But it's more topics of not just mental health, but like queer relationships being portrayed without bias behind it, because a lot of people hold certain internal biases towards all sorts of things, from like your views on religion and politics to your views on queer relationships, certain disabilities, mental health. There's a lot of bias in the world, and it's a matter of portraying that in a way that is, well, as least biased as possible, but also without so much censoring a character. If a character themselves has bias, absolutely let that shine through, but address that.
Thank you for clearing that up.
That's okay.
So, I mean, this might be a kind of obvious question, but why does this matter?
I don't know about what you guys are getting on your Instagram feeds, but I see so much stuff about like being progressive about mental health, from like diagnoses becoming more prevalent, being aware of things now like complex PTSD. There's a lot more discourse around like putting self-love and self-care first. And with that, I believe that our writing also needs to reflect the social world around us, in that we need to be moving forward with how accessible our writing is, and making sure that, I guess, topics are out there for people to hear about. We need to let that be known, like, in my opinion, that it's okay to talk about mental health. It's okay to take mental health days from work or school. And part of that to me is reflected in writing.
Yeah, very much the world of fiction and art are reflections of the world around us. So that makes a lot
Definitely.
of sense. So what are some of the mistakes you see authors making, the common errors or the common biases maybe that you see?
They tend to be, there's certain ones with each genre I've found. With a lot of thrillers, you see a lot of mental health slurs, things like the word psycho, which is factually incorrect in most cases. because people who are psychotic are more like, when you use that word in thrillers, it's almost always used to as a way of saying that the person is very, very dangerous to those around them. Whereas people who are going through a psychotic break are most a risk to themselves than those around them. So the majority of the time I see this word used, it is used incorrectly. And even the word psychopath itself, which is no longer an active diagnosis, we now use antisocial personality disorder is now what we use to cover what used to be called psychopathy, and anything that comes under that is now really treated as antisocial personality disorder. But then there's a strong misunderstanding of that because it makes it sound like you're just introverted. So I try and make sure that I inform people of what the correct diagnosis is, as well as why we use it, and try and steer people away from using those words like psycho and instead offer words like mad or unhinged or lost the plot, you know?
Wow, yeah. It's and these are things that very much do change over time. I mean, even like the word queer used to be used as a slur, but now it's been
Absolutely.
reclaimed and used in a different way. So I guess you've really got to be up on sort of how the language is evolving, and it's not just something you can look up in a dictionary necessarily. What kind of research do you do in order to understand these kinds of things? Do you keep up with medical journals and things? Because I know you sort of specialize more in the mental health, queer and LGBT issues. What sort of things do you follow in order to keep up with those things?
On Instagram, I follow a lot of like psychologists and psychiatrists and even therapists in America have a platform where they talk about like what's really relevant today, how diagnoses are changing, what the emphasis lies on nowadays, how I guess the diagnostic criteria is met today rather than in the past, and terminology that is and isn't okay. There's also like spokespeople for autism, like Chloe Hayden. I absolutely love her. She's got an amazing platform. She's got a podcast as well and a book out now, and she talks about autism from a variety of different standpoints and how we can be more inclusive. So, following people like that on social media is a great way to keep up with things. And then just talking to people around you. Like, I have honestly, the majority of my friends are either trans or non binary. And I just say, look, I've heard that this term could be a slur. Is that something I need to take on board? And they'll be like, oh yeah, like usually everyone's so nice, everyone's just glad that you're thinking about them, so it's not like, oh, you can't ask that. It's very much more on in terms of like, thank you so much for thinking to ask and consulting like essentially a primary source for their input.
This is difficult as well because these are such subjective things a lot of the time as well. There's no sort of black and white, like this is the correct term that you use necessarily, and something that's offensive to one person might not be to another. So how do you kind of balance that? Sounds like an absolute minefield.
Thankfully, a lot of these people that I follow on Instagram, I've seen they do a lot of like polls or question boxes on their stories, like what's the worst thing someone's called you and why did it upset you, or unpopular opinions where people get to say, look, this term doesn't actually bother me that much because of context. I also, as you're probably aware, I read a lot. So I will read things that focus on mental health and queer stories, as well as memoirs where people talk about their experiences and reflect on that, and the things that I guess make or break their relationship with themselves, their mind, their body, all of that sort of thing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you've really got to be, in the trenches and understanding how all this is affecting the world, and have a really deep and broad understanding of this as well. And I suppose there are probably plenty of topics as well that you're not qualified to talk about, or to sort of to do this job with. So do you work with other sensitivity readers, or do you turn down things when they come your way and it's about a topic that you're not qualified for?
Yeah, so usually when you engage a sensitivity reader, you want to look for their qualification, or not their qualifications, but their areas of interest and the things that they have experience reading. So for instance, I've got 6 topics that I cover, and I do say that I have done readings for topics of sexual assault, but I don't have much. That sounds bad. I don't have much experience with sexual assault personally, so I can only go to a certain extent, and I will warn the reader that I can only go to a certain extent, so it depends what type of sexual assault it is, I guess. Otherwise, I can recommend them to someone else. There are databases out there I know there's one in Australia. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I can send it to you. There is a database for sensitivity readers in Australia, and again, they're listed by their topics, a bit like mine. So you can have like mixed race, or um, really anything that you may not have a personal experience of but want to include. So whether it's to do with race, sexuality, life experiences, disability, I, for instance, can comment on the use of a cane and the practicality of that, and a walker, but not a wheelchair. So if like I have friends who use them, but if you need a more, I guess, up close look at that, then I would probably suggest you look for a different sensitivity reader who has more experience.
So what stage of the process, of the writing process, are they coming to you? Because I can imagine somebody writing, for instance, about a character who walks with a cane, wanting to do research before actually starting to write. But you're working with authors a bit later on down the road, isn't that right?
Yeah, usually I take them on at the beta stage because basically my work finesses individual wording as well as broader context. So usually before a developmental editor comes in, it's more helpful for myself and the writer if I come in at a sort of like midway beta stage, so that you've got your story down. I can then finesse the way you want to portray a character, and then the broader, again, edits can come in with a developmental editor and then go through with line editing. So I'm able to do individual words, but also broad topics. If something is approached from a harmful angle, I can bring that to attention before it gets too far down the process. Um, I haven't actually had anyone come to me yet about like earlier stage, like you said, the research side, but I'm absolutely happy to share my knowledge and talk about it. I do a little bit on my Instagram. Like I've shared a bit of my journey with rare bone disease that I had major surgery on about 7 years ago. So I try and put it out there so that people can contact me if they want to explore the topic more. Just let them know that I'm happy to be a research tool for them.
Do you have any other resources that you would recommend to writers, especially within your realm of expertise, that you would suggest that they read before going ahead with second and third drafts, or even before starting to write?
I found memoirs and like autobiographies to be really helpful because you get a personal insight as well as reading how the person speaks about themselves, like things like using person first. So like, I am disabled versus I have a disability. That sort of terminology is really good to pick up, and you won't realize that you're picking it up until you finish, and then you're like, oh yeah, I noticed that they talked like that in this book. So memoirs have been very helpful for me in learning how people think of their own experiences when I don't have the experience themselves. Like, for instance, I said I've got a lot of trans friends and I question them, but I don't have the experience myself. So I can say, can you tell me what body dysmorphia or body dysphoria feels like?
Yeah, and you probably don't want to be that annoying friend who's like asking them all the intrusive questions all the time.
No, trust me, I only ask my best friends that.
I mean, I suppose you can learn a lot through simply Googling things, but you're right. Memoirs make a lot of sense because it's a primary source essentially,
Yeah.
isn't it? It's you're hearing it in their voice, presumably, if it hasn't been ghostwritten.
And the same as blogs. They work in the exact same way, and you often get a bit more of a detailed version of events as well than you would in a autobiography or a memoir.
Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. It's been very, very enlightening for me. I feel like I have a much better understanding now of how accuracy reading works. And you're just launching your business as an accuracy reader. So where can people go to find you on the internet, assuming that your website's up and everything?
So my website is almost ready to go. Probably only another week, but I'll keep everyone posted. I'm very active on Instagram. My handle's just r.c.thompson without a P, THOMSON. I post every single day on there about what I'm reading, things I've learnt, tips for authors, all that sort of thing. And the website will be r.c.thompson.com. And I'm kind of on TikTok, but I'm still getting the hang of that. I'm launching this professionally as of the 1st of August with a proper fee structure and everything. I'm still working out the kinks in the meantime. But until then, Instagram's definitely my best port of call.
Well, I will put all the details in the show notes and the thingy in what's it called in YouTube? I'm so good at this. The description. That's the word.
No, I know what you mean.
I
don't know the terms either.
Anyway, thank you so much. This has been fantastic, and so nice to finally meet you. We've talked a lot on Instagram, but yeah, this is really lovely.
Thank you very much for having me.